The second strike took Arc 10 while I still had both hands inside the wound the first one had left in Arc 9. I felt it through the deck before I heard it. A hard double knock, like a god rapping knuckles on the hull, and then the pressure doors slammed in, sequenced down the ring, and the screaming started in the corridors behind me. I am Selvik Roa, harbormaster of Anchorage Kel Tara, and I had been harbormaster for 31 years. On the morning my station began to die around me. The debris plane had opened 20 minutes earlier. A switching fault in Kel approach had walked an automated freight string 2 degrees out of its lane, and the lead container had clipped hull 1182. A decommissioned shot barge the hegemony had parked in graveyard orbit and forgotten, with her magazines never properly drawn down because drawing them down cost money and forgetting cost nothing. The magazines cooked off in 11 seconds. What had been one dead barge became 40,000 pieces of dead barge, all of them moving at orbital speed, all of them crossing our altitude twice every 91 minutes, and my ring sat directly in the plane like a throat under a falling sword. I got the Arc 9 crews moving aft with their suit seals half fastened and their tool belts still on, because a keelwright who drops her belt in an emergency has been trained wrong, and I trained these. The storm spur off Arc 7 was the oldest, deepest, thickest-skinned compartment on the anchorage, built into the original keel, plated like a vault. The place the first guild had meant for exactly this. We packed it with everyone we could reach. 84 souls came through the spur doors before I sealed them. The anchorage's complement that morning had been 590. Pelin Oru, my junior keelwright, was counting heads with his crest flat against his skull, and his inner eyelids flickering the way they do in the young when the body wants to faint and the mind refuses permission. He kept counting anyway. I noted that the way you note a beam that holds. The third strike came at minute 34 and took the communications mast off Arc 1, the way a knife takes the head off a flower. I watched it go on the spur's one working external feed, the whole mast, dish and all, folding sideways into the plane and shredding into glitter. With it went our long range, our laser relay, our traffic transponder, and every licensed channel the hegemony permits a civilian anchorage to own. What we had left was short-range suit talk and the planet below us. Kel filled the spur's keel viewport, blue, white, and serene, its coastal cities just kindling their evening lights along the Corvana shore. 2 million people in Corvana alone. They could see us if they looked up, a new bright scratch across their sky where their shipyard used to be one clean point of light. Kel approach could still hear our suit band squawk when their satellites passed close. The reply, when it finally came, was a recorded protocol header, and then a traffic officer reading from a screen in a voice that had been trained to stay level and was staying level, the way a man stays on a ledge. The third orbital flotilla had been alerted. The flotilla's assessment was attached. I made him read it twice because I could not believe it the first time. Doctrine forbade the flotilla to enter an uncharted debris plane. The plane would be charted by survey drones as resources permitted. Modeling indicated the plane would shed to acceptable approach risk in approximately 26 days. Rescue operations would commence at that time. The anchorage was instructed to conserve consumables and await relief. The message ended with a wish for our endurance, which is the hegemony's way of saying a prayer without admitting it prays. I stood with my hand on the cold rail under the viewport and did the arithmetic I had already done in my head 3 times, hoping it would come out differently with a rail under my hand. The storm spur's scrubbers and reserve cells could hold 84 people for 9 days, perhaps 11 if we slept in shifts and chilled the compartment until our blood thickened. 26 days was not a number that lived in the same world as 11. The flotilla knew it. The traffic officer reading me the assessment knew it. He wished us endurance again, and the satellite passed out of range, and the channel went to static, and behind me 84 of my people pretended very hard not to have heard. The fourth strike, minute 51. Hold fitting Bay 5 on Arc 3 and left 17 of my fitters sealed in the bay's pressure shelter with the arc spine broken on either side of them. We got their suit band beacon, thin and steady through the hull. We could not get them. Between the spur and Bay 5 lay 400 meters of ring that no longer had a floor, spinning wrong, shedding pieces of itself into the plane every revolution. Old Tarshivek, my dock foreman for 20 years, looked at the structural feed and then looked at me and said nothing at all, which from Tarsh was a full report. It was Deves Kill who remembered the handle. She was our registrar, 82 years old, the keeper of the anchorage's paper, and Keltara was old enough to have actual paper, sealed in keel lockers, from the centuries when the yards belonged to the Keelwright Guild and not to the hegemony that swallowed it. She came to me in the third hour, when the spur had gone quiet with the particular silence of people rationing their own breath, and she put her dry gray hand on my arm and said, Harbormaster, the keel gallery. There is equipment in the keel gallery. The keel gallery is storage, I said. It's lamps and lashings and 300 years of paint. There is a handle, she said. I have inventoried it 41 times in 60 years. Every audit, some young officer asks what it is, and every audit the answer in the ledger is the same. Legacy equipment, guild era, mutual aid, do not remove. It has its own power cell. The cell is replaced every audit. That is the only maintenance line in the whole ledger that has never once been allowed to lapse, and I never knew why, and the ledger never says. I went because doing something foolish was better than rationing breath while 17 of my fitters' beacons blinked 400 meters away. The keel gallery sat below the spurs deck down a ladder in the oldest metal the anchorage owned. Gilt plate, hand-riveted, black with age and honest. And there set into the keel itself behind a hinged cage was the handle. It was brass and ceramic, longer than my hand, worn bright along its grip the way metal wears when generations touch it just to touch it. Beside it, bolted to the keel, a plate carried 2 scripts. The upper script was Old Sarathi, gild-cut, the letters of my grandmothers. The lower script was nothing of ours. Blocky, alien, patient-looking characters I had seen only in museum cases. The Old Sarathi read mutual aid, the keel compact, squeeze and hold 5 counts. Answer comes. What is the second script? Pellin asked. He had followed me down, so had Deves, on her 2 canes, refusing the latter's help. Terran, Deves said. It is Terran. Human writing. There was a compact, harbormaster, before the hegemony. The guild signed it with a human convoy 347 years ago. The ledger keeps the entry. I can recite it. I have read it 41 times, wondering why we still change that power cell. Earth, Pellin said, in the voice you use for things out of stories. Humans are a registry footnote. They're 6 jumps away. They were struck from the foreign instruments list before my mother was born. Nobody has spoken to Earth from this system in a very long time, Deves agreed, and nobody has unbolted that plate either. I looked at the handle a long moment. I want to be honest in this account because everything after this depended on it. I did not believe in the handle. I was a harbormaster of the Vakar hegemony with a dead commast, a doctrine-bound fleet 26 days away, 9 days of air, 17 fitters in a broken bay, and a piece of gild brass connected, in all probability, to 3 centuries of corrosion and a dead band nobody monitored. I did not squeeze it out of faith. I squeezed it because it was the only thing left on my station that claimed, in writing, that an answer would come. The grip was cold and then it was not. I held it 5 counts. Something below the keel plate woke with a sound I had never heard the anchorage make, a low single chime, like a struck bowl, that went down through the metal and out, I supposed, into the dark, on whatever ancient point-to-point band the guild had bought. And the hegemony had never bothered to cut, because cutting it would have cost money and forgetting was free. We waited. Deves counted under her breath, and I learned later she was counting light lag, because she, alone among us, had read the ledger and knew the band terminated at the system's outer shoal, 41 light minutes out, at a chartered rock our charts marked as a derelict foreign weather post. At 86 minutes, the keel gallery's ancient speaker, a brass horn, museum equipment, a thing I would have sworn was decorative, crackled, cleared, and spoke. It spoke first in Old Sarathi, accented careful, the dialect of my grandmother's pronounced by a mouth not shaped for it. Then it repeated itself in modern trade tongue, flat and clear and unhurried, and the words were these. Anchorage Keltara, this is Compact Watch Station Long Patience. We have your handle. Signal is valid. The keel compact is in force. State your situation when able. We are already moving. Long Patience out. In the keel gallery of my dying station, 84 breaths above me and 17 blinking beacons across the wreck of my ring, I stood with my hands still on the brass and heard a human voice answer a promise 347 years old as though it had been made that morning. Harbormaster, Pellin said faintly, we never called Earth. No, I said. We squeezed a handle our grandmothers wired before the hegemony existed. It seems the other end stayed plugged in. Deves lowered herself onto a lashing crate, folded her hands on her canes and began very quietly to laugh, the dry, shaking laugh of an archivist whose most useless ledger line has just become the only one that mattered. 41 audits, she said. 41 audits I signed for that power cell. Harbormaster, I should like it noted in the record that I was never once permitted to lapse it. It's noted, I said. Above us through the keel came the soft, repeated knock of small debris, the ring grinding itself slowly to pieces in the plane. Below us on a band my hegemony had forgotten it never severed, something 41 light minutes away was already moving. I climbed the ladder to tell 84 people that I had no idea what I had just summoned and that it was coming anyway. The brass horn could receive, and with Pellin's hands and Deves's ledger diagrams it could be made to send. The transmitter under the keel plate was guild work, point-to-point, tight beam, aimed at a fixed rock for 3.5 centuries, Drawing its trickle of power from the cell device had never been permitted to lapse. We had no idea what its margins were. We keyed it anyway, and I gave long patience my situation the way a harbormaster gives it. Numbers first, grief later. 84 sheltered in the storm spur, air and power for 9 days at discipline. 17 sealed in fitting bay 5 on a broken arc, beacons strong, no path to reach them. 489 unaccounted for, and the ring still being struck on every revolution of the plane. Communications mast destroyed. Hegemony relief estimated at 26 days. I said that last number plainly. There was no way to say it that was not plain. 82 minutes later, the horn spoke again, and this time the voice gave a name. Keltara, long patience. Watch Officer Imogen Hale. Copy 84 sheltered, 17 isolated, 9 days, 26 days quoted for local relief. A pause is the length of a breath. Quoted by whom is between you and them. Here is what the compact has. Salvage tug Plowman and corvette Adamant are on station with us and are now under burn. Hospital ship Stillwater has been recalled from the Outer Shoal survey and follows. First hull reaches you in approximately 31 hours. Hold your spur, keep your people cold and still, and keep this band open. You are not waiting 26 days. Long patience out. I read the message twice to the spur because the first time nobody breathed. You must understand what we knew of humans, which was nothing, dressed up as something. The hegemony's registry gave them 4 lines. A minor species, 6 jumps rimward, party to no current instruments, contact deprecated. Children's serials gave them more, pale, quick, said to eat fire and grief. The sort of species you put in a story when you need a stranger from the cold. Between 4 lines and a fairy tale, there was no shelf in any of our heads for a watch officer, with a calm voice telling a station of strangers that 3 ships were already burning toward a debris plane their own navy refused to enter. Why, Pellin asked me in the 3rd hour after, would they keep a station crewed for 347 years to answer a handle nobody ever squeezed? I had no answer, so I went and got one. I sat beside Devis Kill in the corner of the spur, where she had spread the guild ledger across 2 ration crates like an altar, and I asked her to recite, and she did, the entry itself in guild shorthand, in the steady voice of a woman who has read a thing 41 times and waited 60 years to be asked. In the guild year that the hegemony's own calendar buries, 9 human ships had crawled into the Kel system at a fraction of light, riding fusion torches centuries out of date. A colony string, sleepers, seed stock, the slow poverty of a species that had set out before anyone offered them a faster way. The lead ship's keel had cracked in a shoal strike 2 systems back. They had nursed it for 19 years. By the time the guild's pickets met them, the crack had walked half the keel's length, and the ship was dying the slow way, with 4,000 sleepers aboard. The Keelwright Guild of Keltara took them into the yards, 2 years in the cradles. The guild rebuilt the human keel with Sarathi plate and Sarathi rivets, and the records say the humans worked alongside, learned the guild's measures, taught the guild their own, and paid in the only coin they had. Engine theory, medical text, and labor. And at the end of it, the guild mother, Avessa Torn, and the human convoy master, a man the ledger names as Elias Nada, signed the keel compact on the station, on guild paper, in 2 scripts. The terms fit on 1 page. Deves read them to me whole, but the heart of them was this. A keel is sacred because every soul aboard hangs from it. Whoever signs keeps 1 watch and 1 handle. If your keel breaks, squeeze the handle and hold counts, and the other signatory comes with what they have as fast as they have it and asks the cost of nothing until everyone is breathing. The compact named no government because the guild was not one, and the humans aboard that string had left theirs 11 light decades behind. It named the yards, and it named the convoy, and their heirs, and their heirs' heirs, for as long as the handle is kept bright and the watch is kept manned. The hegemony absorbed the guilds 90 years later, Deves said. All guild-era foreign instruments were declared lapsed by general order. There is a copy of the order in this ledger, too. It was never served on the other signatory, because the other signatory was filed as a convoy in transit, address unknown. And the handle was never unbolted, because the handle was listed as equipment, and equipment belongs to audit, and audit. She tapped the maintenance line with 1 gray finger. Audit only knows how to renew. And the humans kept the watch, I said. The humans, Deves said, appear to have kept the watch. The flotilla found a satellite window in the 11th hour, and Kell approach passed me a message from Fleet Warden Ostrek Val himself. It said, in the way such messages say things, that orbital sensors had detected unidentified foreign hulls under burn within the system, that any contact between a hegemony installation and unregistered foreign vessels was unauthorized, that I was instructed to refuse cooperation, cease any irregular transmissions, and await relief in 26 days as directed. I keyed the suit band when the next window opened, and I said this, and Tarshevik witnessed it. Approach Keltara. Inform the fleet warden that the anchorage has 9 days of air, that his relief is 26 days out by his own assessment, and that the harbormaster will account for every irregular transmission at any tribunal the hegemony cares to convene, provided the hegemony can find anyone left alive on this station to try. Kel Tara Altarsh, who had said perhaps 40 words since the cascade began, looked at the dead channel for a while. Always wondered what you kept under all that paperwork, he said. Turns out it's a spine. Mind it doesn't get you hanged. The plane struck us twice more in the night watch. The second strike walked a seam open in the spur's outer plating, and we lost 2 compartments of reserve air before Tarsh's crew got the bleed clamped. 8 days now, not 9, and quieter in the spur afterward, the arithmetic sitting on every chest. In fitting Bay 5, the 17 beacons still blinked. We had rigged a relay so their suit band could reach us, and in the dark hours my fitters' voices came across the wreck thin as thread, asking after their crews, asking after the ring. Their senior was Amadessel, Master Wright, 40 years in the cradles, and when I told her what I had squeezed and what had answered, she was silent a moment and then said, "My grandmother used to polish that handle when she stood night audit. Said brass keeps a promise if you keep it bright." We laughed at her. Other silence. "Don't tell her grave I laughed, harbormaster." At hour 29, the spur's external feed picked up the burn flare. At hour 30, long patience confirmed. Plowman, decelerating hard on a line that did not skirt the debris plane, did not wait for it to shed, did not match any approach solution the hegemony's doctrine contained. A line that entered the plane, threading the thick of it, dead toward us. Keltara, long patience. Plowman is committing to the plane on the next node. Master rigger aboard is Thomas Calloway. You'll have his voice directly when he's inside your horizon. Do nothing to assist. His words, harbormaster, not mine. Tell them to sit still. We've flown through worse than this on purpose. I stood at the keel viewport with Pellin and watched the flare come down into the glitter where my rings pieces and the dead barge's pieces tumbled together, and I will set down honestly what I felt, because this account is for the record, and the record deserves it. It was not relief yet. It was the cold water feeling of a man who has rung a bell out of a story and heard the story ring back. We had not called Earth. We had not aimed anything at Earth. Earth had been 4 lines in a fairy tale on the registry of an empire that had struck them out a lifetime ago. And Earth's tug was now inside our debris plane, burning toward 84 breaths and 17 beacons, because 347 years ago, a guild mother and a convoy master had agreed that a keel is sacred, and somebody on their side had never stopped believing it. "They're insane," Pellin whispered, watching the flare jink and flare and jink again, threading stone. "No," said Devesikil behind us, not looking up from her ledger. "They are punctual. 347 years, young right. By their lights, they are answering the same day the call went out. The longest hours of my life were the 11 between Plowman's commitment to the plane and her arrival, and the plane used every one of them. At hour 20 of the burn watch, the flotilla finally sent something into the debris, a survey drone, Doctrine's own answer, a sleek, expensive instrument that entered the plane edge to begin the charting that would, in 26 days, have certified our grave safe to visit. It lived 11 minutes. We watched its track on the spur's feed, watched it jink twice, watched it become a brief new family of debris among the old. And I confess that a part of me I am not proud of looked at that 11-minute track and understood for the first time that the flotilla's doctrine was not cowardice. The plane really was what their models said it was. Their instrument, flown their way, really did die in 11 minutes. And 40,000 kilometers below it, a human tug was flying into the thick of the same weather, with 30 living crew aboard, on the strength of a brass handle and a watch officer's 11 words. Doctrine was not wrong about the danger. Doctrine was wrong about what the danger was for. At hour 23, we lost the beacon from the paint stores aft of Arc 11. 6 of my people had been holding pressure in there since the cascade. A storeskeeper and 5 painters, too far to reach, steady on the suit band twice a watch. There was no final transmission. There was a strike we all felt through the keel, and then the next scheduled contact came and went empty. And Pellin called them for a full hour, protocol intervals, his voice flattening with each repetition the way a Wright's voice does when the work is hopeless and the work must be done anyway. I let him do the full hour. Then I logged the names myself, all 6, in my own hand, because a harbormaster's hand in the log is the only honor I had left to issue, and I told the spur because they would know by morning and they deserved to know from me. It was Watch Officer Hale, 41 light minutes away, who taught me that hour what the watch actually was. Her reply to my casualty report came back at the lag's full round trip, and it did not say what every hegemony condolence template says, that the loss is regretted and the inquiry will follow. It said, copy 6 souls, names received and logged in the compact book. Long patience holds a watch for the dead of signatories. It is old custom, and you need do nothing. Their names will be read on our next bell. You have 101 living in your charge tonight, harbormaster. Spend yourself there. We will sit with the others. Long patience out. And 41 light minutes away that night, on a bare rock our charts called a derelict weather post, 6 humans who had never met a Sarathi stood in their mess and read the names of my painters aloud because their custom required it. Deves wrote the custom into the ledger. Her hand shook, the only time I ever saw it. At hour 26, the plane tried to take the spur itself. It was Tarsh who saw it building. He had taken over the debris plot to spare Pelin, and Tarsh read tumbling wreckage the way he read frames by what it was about to do. A slab of Arc 10's outer plating, 40 tons, our own skin come back for us, had been walking its orbit closer with every revolution, and at hour 26 his plot turned red. Intersection with the storm spur in roughly 3 hours, closing slow, almost gentle, utterly fatal. We had no engines. The spur was a keel compartment, not a ship. The flotilla's window was shut for another 5 hours. Plowman was 8 hours out, decelerating, too far to do anything but listen. But listen she could, and the band was open, and this is the part of my account that the hegemony's engineering schools now teach, so I will tell it exactly. Calloway's voice came down the old guild wire, relayed through long patience, half shouted over his own deceleration burn, and what he said was, "Harbormaster, your spur was built by people who didn't trust engines. Guild keels have cold gas trim points for cradle alignment, bottle banks, mechanical valves, no power needed. They'll be behind the year paint somewhere on frames 9 and 14. Find them. You don't need to dodge the slab. You need 400 meters of sideways over 3 hours. And that's nothing. That's a whisper. Find the trim points, and I'll walk you through the burn myself. Frames 9 and 14. Under 3 centuries of paint and lashing rails, and the bolted accumulations of generations who had forgotten their own keel could move. Wrights went at frames 9 and 14 with chisels and bare hands, and the trim points were there. 8 bottle banks, guild brass, valves stiff as doctrine, gauges still holding pressure their builders had charged them with before the hegemony existed, because the guild had built for the day the yard would need what nobody believed it would ever need. Everything on that station that saved us, I find when I assemble this account, was something somebody had maintained without believing in it. Calloway walked us through the burn at 8 hours distance and 41 minutes lag, which meant he could not walk us through it at all, and knew it. And so instead, in 3 long transmissions, he taught it. The sequence, the count, the abort points, what a stuck valve sounds like through a wrench, what to do for the 2 failure modes we could survive, and how to recognize the one we couldn't. Then his voice said, "You have rights and you have brass and you have 3 hours, harbormaster." That's more than my first foreman ever gave me. Burn when ready. We'll hear it in the plot. And the channel went to the hiss of his deceleration, and it was ours to do. Tarsh took valves 1 through 4. I took 5 through 8. Pelin called the count from the plot, his voice steady the whole way down. And at the spur's 101 stations, 101 souls lay braced in the dark, feeling their dead station's last live compartment whisper sideways on breath stored by their great-great-grandmothers. The burn ran 4 minutes. The slab of our own skin crossed our old position 2 hours and 51 minutes later, silent, enormous in the feed, and missed the spur by 390 meters, and tumbled on into the dark to be somebody's problem in some other century. When the plot confirmed the miss, nobody cheered that time either. But Tarsh Evek racked his wrench, looked at the brass valve bank for a long moment, and then turned to the spur at large and said, "When this is over, every apprentice on this anchorage learns the keel before they learn the cradles. The whole keel. I don't care what the syllabus says." And that, in the practical dialect of an old foreman, is what hope sounds like. A man 3 days from suffocation, scheduling the curriculum. The last transmission before Plowman's arrival was not for me. It came addressed to the plot operator, Keltara, and Pelin straightened as if grabbed. Son Calloway's voice said, "I've had your tracking data on my board for 11 hours. You called that slab 40 minutes before our systems flagged it, and your count just now didn't wobble once. I've got riggers with 20 years who'd have wobbled. When we're alongside, you're on my board, if your harbormaster can spare you." Pelin looked at me. I made a show of weighing it. "Some debts you pay forward in the only coin a young Wright understands." "Spared," I said. "Mind your footing on their decks." Plowman came through the plane the way a draft beast comes through a flooded ford, not gracefully, not quickly, but with a terrible, unarguable steadiness, leaning into the current and refusing to be moved by anything smaller than itself. The feed showed her to us long before her voice arrived, a blunt, ugly, beautiful hull, all spine and shoulder, her bow bristling with folded gantries and her flanks studded with maneuvering clusters that fired in patterns too fast to read. Around her, Ahead of her, her mass catchers worked, wide-mouthed funnel drones that flew the corridor in front of the tug, swallowing gravel, netting the fist-sized killers, shouldering the slab-sized ones aside with thumps of cold gas. She was not dodging the plane. She was eating a road through it. Anchorage, Kaltara, this is salvage tug Plowman. The voice was deep, unhurried, roughened at the edges, the voice of a man who has spent decades being obeyed by machinery. Thomas Calloway, master rigger, we have your spur on optics. Your ring is in a bad way, but your spur looks tight, and that keel section is gild plate, which is the good news, because gild plate is what we wrote the book on. Sit still, seal everything you can reach, and somebody put a light in the keel viewport so my lads have something homely to steer at. We'll be alongside in 40 minutes. Pellin put a hand lamp in the viewport. I want that in the record too, that the first thing Earth asked of us, after 347 years, was a light in a window. They were alongside in 37 minutes. The docking was the gentlest thing I have ever felt on that station. A tug the mass of a city block laying herself against our wounded keel like a hand on a sick animal, her gantries unfolding, her clamps finding the gild hardpoints as though she had drawings. She did have drawings. I learned that within the hour, the compact archive at Long Patience kept the yard plans of Anchorage Kaltara as built. Guild era, every rivet, and 3 centuries of their watch crews had studied a station none of them ever expected to see, because keeping the watch meant being ready to keep it. The first human I ever saw in the flesh came through the spur's keel lock with his helmet, already racked back on his shoulders, which the manuals all forbid, and his gloved hands held open and empty and wide of his body, which no manual anywhere teaches, a gesture older than manuals. He was shorter than I expected, broader, gray-bearded, with a face seamed and weathered like a hull that has worked, and dark, quick eyes that went around my spur once and priced every weld in it. Thomas Calloway looked smaller than his voice. Most load-bearing things do. Harbormaster Rowe. He said my name correctly. Someone had practiced. Tom Calloway. Sorry for the delay. The handle's an old system and we only rate it for a 30-hour response. Should have been 28, but your plane had other ideas. He looked past me then, at the 84 of them. My keelwrights and fitters and clerks pressed back against the spur walls staring at him. At the first human, at the fairy tale standing in their storm spur in a scuffed orange suit. And he nodded to them generally, the way a foreman nods to a yard. Morning. Heard your keel broke. We're the other signature. Sorry for the delay. 18 of my people had to have it translated twice. Not because the trade tongue was unclear, but because the sentence refused to mean what it meant. We had not called them. I said exactly that to him. In the first hour, while his riggers came through the lock-in pairs hauling cell banks and scrubber cartridges and water and a folding surgery table, I said, Master Calloway, you understand, the handle was guild equipment. The compact was struck from our registries before my mother was born. We did not call Earth. We did not aim anything at Earth. We squeezed a piece of brass because we were dying and it was there. Calloway went on checking the torque on a cell bank coupling while I said it, and when I finished he straightened and considered me with those quick dark eyes and said, Harbormaster. The handle rang at Long Patience at 041 station time, valid code, good signature, 5-count hold. That's the whole of what the compact requires either of us to know. Where you aimed it is a question for lawyers, and we didn't bring any. We brought air. He slapped the cell bank. 11 more of these on the next sled. You're off the 8-day clock as of an hour ago. Now show me your broken arc, because I'm told there are 17 of yours sitting in it, and my crews get restless when people sit in broken arcs. I showed him. He stood at the structural feed for a long, quiet minute, reading the wreck of Arc 3 the way Deves reads ledgers, the snapped spine, the bay turning with the broken ring section, 400 meters of collapsed truss between us and them, the whole assembly shedding mass into the plane with every revolution. Rotation's the killer, he said at last. Bay's holding pressure, but every turn through the plane she takes more hits, and that truss is one bad strike from folding onto the shelter. Right, he keyed his suit. Plowman deck, wake the spiders, rig for a spin job, and get me Adamant's time. Adamant makes the plane edge in 9 hours, boss, said his deck officer. Tell her to step on it. We'll want her standing between us and the weather while we work. He turned back to me, and something in my face must have asked the question, because he answered it plainly. Second hull, Harbormaster, corvette. She's not for show, a corvette's got the legs and the sensors to play. Goalkeeper in a debris plane, knock down the big movers before they reach us. You'll want to tell your people, because she has guns, and your Navy is going to have opinions about that, and I'd rather your 84 heard it from you than from your Navy. A corvette, armed, human, inbound to stand goalkeeper over a hegemony anchorage, I told my people. The opinions of my Navy, when the next satellite window opened, were everything Calloway had predicted, and I logged them and went back to work, because by then the work had begun, and the work was the only language all of us spoke. What I remember of those first 12 hours is competence so dense it read as strangeness. Plowman's riggers moved through my wrecked ring the way my grandmother's generation must have moved, without hesitation, without ceremony, marking their own anchors, trusting their own lines, two by two, each pair narrating their work on an open channel in flat, unhurried voices so that everyone always knew where everyone was. They spoke to my crews like colleagues. They learned every name they were given on the first telling. Their sleds ran a circuit, tug to spur, spur to tug, and on every return leg they carried our wounded into Plowman's sickbay, where a surgeon with steady hands and appalling jokes did not lose one of the 19 souls we gave her. And the spur began, hour by hour, to sound different. You could hear it change. 84 people who had been rationing their own breath began to talk, then to work, then. When the 11th cell bank came through the lock and the scrubber margin went green for the first time since the cascade. To believe. Micro payoff is not a word I had then. What I had was Pelinoru standing in the keel gallery doorway, with tears standing in his eyes and 3 centuries of dust on his hands, saying, "Harbormaster, the second hull just crossed the plane edge." They came. We rang a bell, and they came. "Mind your footing on the gallery ladder," I told him, because a harbormaster cannot say the other thing and remain a harbormaster. Amadessel's voice came across the relay from Bay 5 in the 14th hour, dry as guild paper. "Harbormaster, my fitters inform me there is a human salvage tug clamped to our keel and a human warship parking itself overhead, and they wish to know if this means we may stop chilling the shelter, because Right Cephal's feet have been in my back for 2 days. "Tell Right Cephal to keep his boots on," Calloway answered her himself before I could key. "We spin-stop your ark in 6 hours, ma'am, and then we come and get you, and the first thing off that sled after you is a flask of something hot." Plowman's word on it. A pause came down the relay, 17 people long, then Amadessel, Master Wright, 40 years in the cradles, who had laughed at her grandmother for polishing brass. "Understood, Plowman. We'll keep the porch light on." Bay 5 out. Adamant arrived with the Dawn Terminator, sliding up the plane's edge and going to station 1,000 meters over my broken ring, lean where the tug was broad, quiet where the tug was loud, her point defense turrets waking and tracking with a smoothness that made my remaining traffic officers stop and stare. Within an hour, the strikes on the ring stopped, not lessened. Stopped, her guns spoke perhaps 40 times in that first day, short, flat coughs of light, and 40 pieces of the dead barge that had been falling toward my people for 3 days became vapor and stopped being anyone's problem forever. Her commander hailed me once, briefly, a woman's voice, courteous and spare. "Harbormaster Roa, Corvette Adamant, Commander Ruth Osei. Work safe." That was the whole transmission. I have served the hegemony all my life, and I have never once heard the flotilla say anything in 9 words that made me feel half so guarded. In the spur, Deves Kill ruled a fresh line into the guild ledger in her careful registrar's hand, and when I asked her what she was writing, she turned the book so I could see. The entry read, "Compact response logged. Signal to first hull alongside 31 hours 14 minutes. The other signatory keeps good books. The plane hit Plowman on the 2nd day of operations, and what happened next taught me more about humans than the rescue itself. It was a gravel cluster, too dispersed for Adamant to fully erase, and the tug took the remainder across her dorsal spine. A sound like the whole sky clearing its throat felt through the clamps into our keel. 3 of her gantries went to scrap. A fuel line opened along her back and bled glittering vapor. Her number 2 catcher drone died outright. On any hegemony vessel I have served, that is a casualty stand down. Operation cease. Damage control takes the ship. The mission officer drafts the signal that explains why the schedule has moved. Plowman's deck channel barely changed pitch. Deck spine watch. We're hit. Dorsal 4 through 9. Fuel's venting. Nobody's hurt. Mev's mad about her drone. A pause. "Boss, schedule hold is 40 minutes. Take 50 and do it right," Calloway said. "Sleds keep running on the port circuit. The wounded don't care about our spine." The sleds kept running. The wounded kept moving through the damage around it, the orange suits rerouting their own circulatory system without dropping a single rhythm of the work. And then came the thing I had not foreseen, though I should have. My own people would not stay out of it. Tarsh was suited and at the lock before the 50 minutes were 10 gone, with 2 of his frame crew in a fitter's kit, and his entire argument to me was, "Their spine, our keel, same job." And his entire argument to Plowman's deck officer was to hold up his hands, palms out, Wright's calluses showing through the suit's translucent grip. The gesture older than manuals, returned across 347 years. They took the help the way working people take help, instantly, without ceremony, with a frequency assignment and a list. For 3 hours, Sarathi keelwrights crawled Plowman's wounded spine beside human riggers, hauling new line, fishing the dead drone aboard so its parts could live on in its sisters, and I stood at the keel viewport listening to a joint repair channel conducted half in trade tongue, half in the human's own talk, and entirely in the universal language of people passing each other the correct tool slightly before it is asked for. Right Cephal, the same Cephal whose cold feet had annoyed Amadessel through 5 days in a sealed bay, sweated a fuel coupling alongside a human, his own age, and I heard the human say, "Where'd you learn to lay a bead like that?" And Cephal answer, "From the woman we're going back in for." And the human say nothing at all, just tap Cephal's shoulder once with a closed fist gently, which I have since learned is a whole sentence. It was that evening, over rations in the spur, that the question my whole station had been circling finally landed on me. It came from Brana Solt, my senior medic, who had spent 2 days handing her worst cases up into a human surgeon's care and was sitting with the exhausted, suspicious stillness of a professional whose patients have all inexplicably lived. "Harbormaster," she said, "I keep waiting for the invoice. Salvage rights, mineral concessions, basing privileges, a debt against the anchorage's charter. Something. Species do not do this. What do they get?" I had asked Calloway nearly the same question that morning, in nearly the same words, because 31 years of port administration trains a man to read every kindness as an opening position. I gave Brana his answer exactly as he gave it to me, leaning on his tension board, watching his riggers and my rights walk his ship's wounded spine together. He said, "We get the same thing you got, Harbormaster. A signatory that answers. You think we kept long patience, man, for your sake? That watch is for us. Every human crew that ever flies a broken keel into nowhere flies it a little steadier knowing the compact's real, knowing somewhere out in the dark, a handle still works. The day we let your end lapse, ours is just a light we leave on for ourselves." Brana was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That is either the most selfish thing I have ever heard or the least." And I said yes, because by then I understood that the answer was yes, and that the humans had simply stopped seeing a difference where we still drew one. I will set one more scene into the record from those days, small as it is, because when I am gone, the official histories will keep the burns and the tonnage and lose this, and this is the one I would keep if I could keep only one. The second night of operations, I came down to the keel gallery on my watch round and found 2 figures sitting on the deck plates by the handle in the worklight's pool. Deves Kill, the guild ledger open across her knees, and plowman surgeon, a tall woman called Okonkwo, with 12 hours of triage behind her and another 12 ahead, drinking something hot from a flask, listening. Deves was reading her the compact, not explaining it, reading it, in Old Sarathi first and then, in her careful trade tongue, line by line the way you read scripture or specifications. I stopped on the ladder and did not interrupt. "And the cost of nothing shall be asked until everyone is breathing." Deves finished and closed the ledger on its ribbon. The surgeon was silent a moment. Then she said, "We have a version in our archive, you know, at long patience." Same words. Our copyists have added one annotation about 200 years back. There was a debate, apparently, about whether everyone in Clause 4 meant the signatories' people or all souls aboard regardless of flag. Watch Commander Okafor, year 151 of the watch. Her rulings in the margin. "What did she rule?" Deves asked. "One word," the surgeon said. "Everyone." Initialed it and went back to her shift. She screwed the cap onto her flask and stood, 12 more hours waiting for her above, and looked down at the old registrar with the worn brass shining between them. "It's a good text, ma'am. We didn't keep faith with it because we're a virtuous species. Half my fleet would argue we're not. We kept faith with it because it's the only kind of law that gets easier to obey the more broken everything else is." You squeezed. We came. "Everything I have done aboard this wreck for 2 days follows from 4 words on a plate." She nodded to the handle, the way Calloway did, the way they all did. I had begun to notice. A small bow to a piece of brass. "Your grandmothers wrote good law, Harbormaster," she said to me on her way up the ladder. "It survived both our governments. Most law doesn't survive one." The spin stop of Arc 3 was the most frightening competent thing I have ever watched, and I have spent 31 years watching keelwrights work. The arc turned through the plane once every 4 minutes, a 400-meter blade of broken truss with a pressurized bay full of my fitters near its outboard end, and every revolution swung them through the debris stream like a child swinging a lantern through rain. You cannot grapple a thing like that from a tug. The moment arm tears the clamps out, what you do, what it had never once occurred to any engineer of the hegemony that you could do, because doctrine said you charted the plane first and the plane took 26 days, was send the spiders. That was Calloway's word for them. Squat 8-limbed rigging drones the size of cargo crates, each one trailing line from plowman's drums. 6 of them flew the gap, matched the arc's tumble, riding the spin, falling with it, limbs spread, and set their anchors into the guild hardpoints one revolution apart, so that the lines paid out in a spiral, and then plowmen took up tension in increments measured, Calloway told me afterward, in single newtons, letting the lines and the tug's mass argue with the spin over the course of 3 hours the way water argues with stone. No drama, no heroic burn. Just an old man at a tension board, 2 riggers calling figures, and a 400-meter blade slowing, degree by degree, until it hung still against the stars and the plane stopped reaching it. 2 of his riggers went across with the sleds then, and 4 of mine went with them, because Calloway asked for them by trade. Your rights know which frames lie about their strength, he said. Mine only know which ones should. Tarshevik led our 4. He came back changed in a way I will not try to put words to, except to record what he said in the lock, helmet under his arm. They cut a man-sized door through a collapsed truss in 40 minutes, harbormaster, and the whole time they kept up a running argument about whose turn it was to buy the beer when they got home. 40 minutes. The flotilla's manual allots 6 hours in a board inquiry. He looked at his hands. I have been doing this work my whole life, and I have just been apprenticed again. They brought the 17 out 2 at a time across the gap, each sled running under Adamant's guns and the Spider's watch, and I stood at the keel lock and counted them through the way a harbormaster counts, by name. Amma Dessel came last, as a master right comes last, and when she stepped through the lock, she stopped in front of the first human she saw, a young rigger half out of her suit, sweat-soaked, grinning, and Amma took the rigger's hand in both of her gray ones, turned it palm up, and studied the calluses for a long moment, like a woman reading a ledger. Right's hands, Amma said. My grandmother polished your handle, child. Then it's her flask, the rigger said, and put it in Amma's hands, hot, and that was the moment. I record it because it is true, that the storm spur of Anchorage Keltara, 84 plus 17 souls, 3 days into dying and 1 day into being answered, made a sound I had not heard since the cascade. It was not a cheer, we are Sarathi. We do not cheer in shelters. It was the sound of 101 people all letting their breath out at once, which in a sealed compartment is a weather system. And Calloway looked up from his tension board and smiled into his beard like a man hearing rain after drought. The cost came an hour later because the plane did not care how the story was going. A slab of barge casing, massive enough that Adamant's commander logged it as a hull rather than debris, came tumbling out of the streams thick on a line her guns could fracture but not erase. She called the fragments. Most went wide. One did not, and it crossed the worksite where the last Spider team was recovering lines, and Right Amma Dessel, who had refused to go inboard until her bay's anchors were struck like a master strikes them, saw it coming on her suit feed before any alarm spoke. The record must say plainly what she did, because the record is what we owe her. She did not freeze and she did not flee. She put both hands on the young human rigger beside her, the one whose flask she had taken, whose name was HFY, and she shoved her down the open throat of the access trunk they had cut, into cover, with the full strength of 40 years in the cradles. The fragment took the truss where they had both been standing. HFY broke 3 ribs against the trunk wall and lived. Amma Dessel's line parted, and the blow carried her into the plane, and her suit held, as guild suits hold, and for 6 minutes the whole channel heard her voice, perfectly level, reading out her drift vector to guide the rescue sled, the way a master right reports, until the second fragment of the same casing crossed her drift line, and the channel went quiet. The sled brought her home anyway. Humans, I learned that day, do not leave the dead in the water. It is not in their procedure, I asked later, thinking to understand them through their manuals. Calloway told me their manuals require a risk assessment. Then he told me no crew of his had ever once assessed that particular risk as too high, and that he had been working salvage for 40 years, and looked at me in a way that closed the topic. We laid Amma Dessel in the keel gallery, beside the handle her grandmother had polished, and her 17 stood watch over her in shifts, and HFY, rib-strapped, stood every one of those shifts on her feet by the ladder, and no one of either species suggested she shouldn't. I found Calloway in the gallery that night, alone, looking at the brass. 31 years I walked past the lockers above this room, I said. I never once came down here. I want you to tell me why your people kept the other end. The truth, rigger to harbormaster, 347 years. 6 crew at a time on a bare rock, rotation after rotation for a handle nobody squeezed. Your government's changed. Your whole species changed. We struck you from our registries and never even told you, and you knew. Do not tell me you didn't know, and you staffed it anyway. Why? Calloway was quiet a while. Then he reached out and rubbed the bright, worn grip of the handle with one thumb, exactly the way Amma's grandmother must have. 9 ships, he said. 4,000 sleepers on the lead hull alone, and her keel was opening like a tin. 11 light decades from home, no way to call anyone, no right to expect anything. And a yard full of strangers took them into the cradles for 2 years and rebuilt the spine of that ship and asked the cost of nothing until everyone was breathing. He looked up at me. Harbormaster, every human alive in this arm of space is downstream of somebody who should have died in the dark and didn't. That convoy made it because your grandmothers decided a keel is sacred. We didn't keep the watch because we expected the handle to ring. We kept it because some debts you don't retire, you just keep bright. The hegemony declared the compact lapsed, I said. 90 years after signing. There is a general order. Your Navy's been quoting it at Commander Osi all day. He almost smiled. Here's the thing about that, Harbormaster. We didn't sign with the hegemony. The hegemony wasn't born yet. We signed with the yards, with whoever keeps the keels at Keltara and their heirs, for as long as the handle is kept bright and the watch is kept manned. He nodded at the brass, worn luminous by 3 centuries of Sarathi hands, its power cell renewed through 41 audits without one lapse. Your empire let the paper lapse. Your people never let the handle lapse. We're not lawyers, but on long patience we always reckoned the handle was the signature. He straightened and gave the grip one last pass of his thumb. Turns out we reckoned right. Above us, that hour, Stillwater crossed the plain edge, the third hull, the hospital ship, white and enormous on the feed, her flanks marked in symbols I did not know then and know now, the open hand, and under it, in 2 scripts, the same 2 scripts as the plate in my keel, the words mutual aid. Pellin called it down the ladder, voice breaking with the size of it. A tug, a warship, and a hospital, for a handle squeezed by strangers on a band the sender's own empire had forgotten. Movement 2 of my account ends there, with Calloway's thumb on the brass and the white ship coming down the plain, and I will say what I understood at last, standing in that gallery. We had asked nothing of Earth, and Earth had heard us anyway, and the answer was not an over-delivery and was not a miracle. It was simply everything they had within 31 hours burn, which is what the compact said, which is what a promise is when someone keeps it. Stillwater did not dock, she swallowed. Her forward bay opened like a cathedral door and took our sleds whole, and inside her my wounded went from field surgery to wards with sheets, and my unhurt went to showers and hot food and quiet rooms where human medics with soft voices and translation collars asked each of them one by one what they had seen and whether they were sleeping, and wrote down the answers as carefully as vitals. The hegemony's manuals classed that as morale support discretionary. Stillwater's manuals, I was given to understand, class it as medicine mandatory. I have come to think you can read a species' entire soul by what its manuals make mandatory. Her search teams went through the wreck of my ring compartment by compartment, with cutting gear and listening spikes and patience, and twice in the first day the spikes found rhythm where the registry said vacuum. 11 traffic clerks in a sealed counting room aft of Arc 6, breathing soup-thick air in the dark and tapping shift and shift on the bulkhead. And then, a full day later when Hope had gone politely quiet about it, 27 souls in the flooded gymnasium of Arc 8, where a quick-thinking bath attendant had sealed the doors and kept them alive on the pool's electrolysis rig for 5 days. The humans brought all 38 out alive. They also brought out our dead, everyone they could reach, bagged and tagged and handled the way you handle things that are sacred, and laid them in a refrigerated hold they had emptied of cargo without being asked, and posted a watch on the hold door because, Calloway said, nobody lies in the dark alone on a compact job. I record the arithmetic because a harbormaster must. 590 souls had stood the morning watch on the day of the cascade. The human's final survivor ledger, cross-checked against Deves's, holds 158 names. It is a terrible number. It is also a number that, under the flotilla's 26-day doctrine, would have been 0. On the 6th day, the plane found one more way to be cruel, and it was Pelinoru who saw it first, because I had put him to tracking the ring's wreckage as a kindness to give his grief a desk. He came to me white-crested and steady. I noted that steadiness. The boy who had flickered in the cascade now reported like a 40-year right, and laid the orbital plot on the table between Calloway and me. The dead third of the ring, arcs 1 and 2, the commass section, 11,000 tons of fused wreck, had been bleeding velocity into the plane all week, strike by strike, drag by drag. Its orbit was decaying. The plot ran forward 18 days and brought it down in a long, shallow fire across Kel's northern hemisphere, and the debris footprint, the ugly probabilistic smear of everything that would survive re-entry, lay across the Corvana coast like a hand over a face. 2 million people. My station, falling on them. I took it to the flotilla on the next satellite window, because that at last was a thing their doctrine must own. Planetary Defense, their charter's first line. Fleet Warden Voll's staff acknowledged receipt. 4 hours later their answer came, and I will summarize it fairly, because the record should be fair even to men I cannot forgive. The flotilla concurred with the projection. The flotilla's deflection assets could not safely operate inside an uncharted debris plane per standing doctrine. The flotilla therefore elected to await natural plane shedding and intercept the wreck in its terminal weeks. With a stated confidence the staff briefing described as moderate. Evacuation planning for the Corvette littoral would begin as a precaution. Evacuation of 2 million people. As a precaution against 11,000 tons of my anchorage, while two ships that had already spent 6 days inside the uncharted plane worked 1,000 meters over my head. Calloway read the message twice. Then he passed it to Commander Osei on the link, and the corvette's commander read it, and there was a silence on that channel of a quality I had not heard from the humans before. A cold, banked, working silence. The silence of professionals declining to say what they think of other professionals. "Harbormaster," Osei said at last. "As the senior compact officer on station, the compact's obligation runs to every soul that hangs from your keel. Your keel is currently 18 days from hanging over a city of 2 million. We read that as in scope." "Plowman?" "Been staring at it since the boy brought the plot," Calloway said. "It's a pig of a job, Commander. 11,000 tons, no symmetry, spinning in 3 axes, and half its hardpoints are slag." A pause, and I could hear absurdly that he was enjoying himself in the grim way of a man shown the problem his whole life has been the apprenticeship for. "We'll need adamant flying close cover the whole burn, still water holding clear with everybody aboard and every line and spider I've got. And Harbormaster, I'll want your rights. Guild plate lies to everyone but the people who raised it." "You'll have them," I said. "You'll have me." Thought I might. He stood and cracked his weathered knuckles and looked at the plot the way Amadessel used to look at a cracked frame. "Right, let's go catch your station." It took 4 days to rig and 1 day to burn, and the fleet warden's flotilla arrived in the middle of it on the 11th day, when the plane had shed just enough at its edges for doctrine to permit their approach. 6 gray hegemony hulls, sleek and crisp and untouched, taking station beyond the debris line like guests arriving after the funeral asking to carve. Their first transmission to the wreck site was not a hail but an instruction. All foreign vessels were to cease operations, withdraw from hegemony sovereign volume, and surrender salvage materials, pending review of their unauthorized presence. Salvage materials. The hold where my dead lay, the wreck being rigged to spare Corvana. The phrase has a number in the hegemony's forms. I had filled in that form myself in my career without ever once hearing it, Commander Osei answered. And her answer is in 3 Navy's archives now, so I will set it down exactly. Hegemony Flotilla, Corvette Adamant. We are conducting rescue and planetary protection operations under a mutual aid instrument executed at this anchorage 347 years ago. There are survivors and honored dead aboard our ships and a deorbit lift in progress above your most populated coastline. When the last survivor is delivered and the wreck is stable, your volume is yours and we will be gone. Until then, Adamant is at station keeping the sky clear, and she is very good at it. Adamant out. The flotilla did not enter the plane. The flotilla watched. Through every hour of the burn, through Plowman lying against 11,000 tons of broken ring with her spine groaning, through the spiders walking lines across, slagged hardpoints my rights certified one by one with their own hands on the plate, through Adamant's guns coughing down the strays while her commander called the sky like a yard foreman, through that one unending 6-hour tandem burn with the tug's torch at full grief and the whole channel down to figures and breathing, through all of its 6 untouched gray warships of my own civilization sat outside the weather and logged us. Tarshevik worked the number 2 tension board through the burn, beside a human he had been apprenticed to for 9 days and now matched call for call. At Burn's End, when the plot finally turned green, when 11,000 tons of Anchorage Keltara rode a stable graveyard orbit that would not touch Kel's air for 10,000 years, when Corvana's 2 million were once again people who would never know how close the sky had come, Tarsh sat back from the board, looked through the viewport at the distant gray flotilla, and delivered the longest speech I ever heard from him. 30 years I told my sons the flotilla was what a Keelwright's taxes bought, he said. Steel between Kel and the dark. Look at them, harbormaster. 6 hulls of steel between the dark and nothing, watching strangers from a fairy tale do their work under their own sky. He shut the board down gently, the way you put a tool to bed. I'm not angry they came late. Doctrine's doctrine. A man can argue doctrine. I'm angry they came late and arrived giving orders. That night, Long Patience sent its daily log call. Watch Officer Hale's voice across the band that had carried everything. Routine, unhurried, asking for our numbers, our needs, our dead, our weather. At the end of it, she said, "Be advised, Keltara, your transmission load is heavy these days, so we've put a second cell on your handles band. Our side, no action your end. Watch just likes redundancy. And then, before signing off, with no change in that level voice at all, long patience has kept this log 347 years, harbormaster. This is the first month the entries were ever about anything. The watch wished me to say it has been an honor. Long patience out. Deves Kill copied that into the guild ledger verbatim in her best registrar's hand. Underneath it she ruled a line, and beneath the line she wrote, "The handle is brighter than it was, so are we." I have not yet told the worst hour of the lift, because it deserves to be told whole. It came in the 4th hour of the tandem burn, with 11,000 tons of dead ring-riding plowmen's thrust like a drunk passenger, and the whole rig balanced on lines my own rights had certified. Hard point 11 sheared, not a line, the point itself, a fist of guild plate that had been slagged half through in the cascade and had hidden its wound under carbon scorch from even Tarsh's eyes. It let go without warning, and 400 meters of line went slack, and 11,000 tons began, very slowly, with the terrible patience of mass, to yaw off the burn vector. The plot's projected footprint, which had been crawling safely poleward for 4 hours, stopped crawling poleward. "Burn down to 10%, Calloway said, in the same voice he used for schedule holds. "Don't kill it, we'll never get her settled again. Spiders 3 and 5 to the break." "Who certified 11? "I did," Tarsh said, flat, already pulling his helmet on. "Then you know the plate around it. Take who you need. You've got the length of this burn, foreman. Past that, we cut her loose over open water and apologize to the fish, and nobody wants to file that report." What they did in 51 minutes, under 10% thrust, on a structure groaning through frequencies that made the suit band warble, was build a hard point where none existed. A bridle of 6 lines around the entire arc segment, load spread across 40 meters of frame, every anchor placed where a Sarathi Wright's hand said the old plate still told the truth, and checked where a human rigger's instruments agreed. Tarsh and the rigger Mev worked the last anchor together. Her gun drill, his eye, 30 seconds of drilling to a heartbeat of decision, repeated. I ran calls from the plot board because Pellin was on Plowman's deck and somebody steady had to do it, and I will admit to the record what my log of that hour does not show. My hands were not steady, only my voice was. A harbormaster's voice is a structural member. It is required to hold whether or not the man behind it does. In the 39th minute, Adamant spoke the only sentence she spoke during the whole repair. A barge fragment, one of the big ones, had come tumbling down the plains thick on a line that would cross the worksite in 90 seconds. And there was no margin to move anyone, and Commander Osi's voice said conversationally, "Stay on your work, it won't arrive." Her forward battery fired a pattern I am told her own gunnery section calls excessive, and the fragment became gravel, and the gravel became light, and the light faded, and the work did not stop because they had been told it needn't, and they believed her. I think about that sometimes more than I think about the burn itself. A whole species' way of being, compressed into 4 words in a gunnery solution. Stay on your work, it won't arrive. The bridle held. The burn came back up in increments, 5% at a time, Calloway and the mass arguing their way back to full grief over 20 patient minutes, and at burn's end the plot turned green and stayed green, and I have already recorded what Tarsh said when it was over, and where the wreck rides now, and for how many thousand years. But I have not recorded the other thing that happened in that hour, because I did not learn of it until 2 days later, and from an unexpected quarter. In the worst of the repair, with the footprint smear touching Corvana's outskirts on every projection board in 2 fleets, a tight beam signal had come into Plowman's communications bay from the Hegemony flotilla, not from the flagship, not on any official channel, and not very deliberately logged through the fleet warden's watch. It was from the gunnery officer of the picket frigate Vakker's Lance, a junior commander whose name I will keep out of this account because she has children and a career, and it contained, without comment, without header, without authorization, the flotilla's complete high-resolution tracking solution for every object in the debris plane above 100 kilograms. The charting their doctrine had been waiting 26 days to certify, running live on their boards the entire time. Plowman's communications officer integrated it. Adamant's threat picture sharpened by an order of magnitude. The watch officer who received it sent back 2 words, "Received, thanks," and the channel never opened again. When Calloway told me, I sat down on a crate in the keel gallery and said nothing for a while. 6 gray hulls outside the weather logging us, and inside one of them, behind the doctrine and the salvage claims and the correspondence about unauthorized foreign contact, a Sarathi officer at a gunnery board had watched the footprint smear touch Corvana and had measured her oath to the hegemony against her oath's actual object, and had quietly committed a court-martial offense to put her fleet's eyes at the service of the strangers doing her fleet's job. "You're not going to report her," Calloway said. It was not a question. "I am required to report her," I said. "I am a chartered officer of the hegemony. And the compact says the cost of nothing shall be asked until everyone is breathing. I looked up at him. Corvana was not yet breathing. I find her transmission falls within the instrument scope. The instrument predates my charter. Deves will support my reading. Calloway grinned into his beard. The only time in 34 days I saw him do it fully. Harbormaster, he said, 3 weeks ago you'd never heard of this compact. Now you're lawyering with it. It is a very good text, I said. I am told it survives governments, he laughed. A short bark, like a clamp seating home, and went back up the ladder to his ship. And that night, the joint repair channel between his riggers and my rights, which official histories of 2 species now record as the beginning of everything that came after, argued for 3 hours about whose turn it was to buy the beer in 2 languages, while above us the sky stayed where it was, because people on every side of every line had decided, against doctrine, against registry, against 2.5 centuries of carefully maintained forgetting that it should. Before the board convened, I went down to Kel for the first time in 6 years, because the summons required my presence in Corvana 3 days early for deposition, and those 3 days belong in this account, because they are how I learned that the hegemony's registry was no longer the only record that mattered. The story had reached the planet ahead of me, the way stories do, leaking around the Admiralty's careful releases through suit band chatter and freight manifests and the families of 158 survivors, and it had reached Corvana in its fullest form because Corvana had the most particular stake in its ending. The city knew about the deorbit plot. Some clerk in the evacuation planning section, ordered to begin precautionary contingency work for the literal, had seen the projection smear laid over his own district, his own street, the school at the end of it, and had decided the public record statute meant what it said. The city had then watched, on amateur telescope feeds and pirated traffic data, while a tug and a corvette from a species their children's cereals called fire eaters spent 5 days and 1 shattering tandem burn making the projection smear never have mattered. I was recognized on the harbor esplanade my first evening down by a fishmonger who had seen the deposition notices. She did not make a ceremony of it. She wiped her hands, came around her stall, looked up at my crest a long moment, and said, "You're the one who pulled the handle, not squeezed, pulled." The planet's version of the story had already grown its own grammar. I said I was. She considered that, then jerked her chin at the boats, at the esplanade, at the whole bright, crowded evening shore that had stood under our falling station without ever being told. My mother's mother used to say the yards answered a broken ship once before the hegemony, and strangers owed us a kindness ever since. She shrugged, half embarrassed. We thought it was a grandmother story. You tell whoever you answer to up there. Corvana doesn't think it's a grandmother story anymore. Then she gave me a fish and would not take payment, and I stood holding it on the esplanade like a man holding the first installment of a debt being repaid in a currency no registry has a column for. By the second day there were lights. It is a Corvana harbor custom, very old, from the fishing generations. When a boat that should have been lost comes home, the shore houses each set 1 lamp in a seaward window for the boats that brought her in. The custom had never once, in the city's recorded history, been used for anything in the sky. The night before the board convened, the Admiralty Annex's 11 floors of pale stone looked down on a shoreline of windows lit 1 lamp each, kilometer after kilometer, the whole literal burning low and steady seaward, toward the harbor, and above the harbor, toward the thin, bright scratch of my broken anchorage, and the 3 foreign hulls in formation beside it. No one had organized it, the Admiralty asked discreetly. No one had organized it. The board's officers walked in under those windows every morning of the proceedings, and whatever the law said, every soul in that chamber knew what the shore had already ruled. Calloway stood at my hotel window the night before his testimony, looking at the lamps a long time. "What are they for?" he asked, and I told him the custom, and that they were for his ships. He was quiet a while, and then he said something I did not understand until much later, when I had stood my own watches on the inner shoal. 347 years of log entries that say no calls, harbormaster. I used to wonder, my first rotation, whether anyone would ever know we were there. He nodded at the shore, the lamps going down the coast past counting. They knew. The hegemony convened its board of inquiry on Kel, in the Admiralty Annex at Corvana, 11 floors of pale stone above a harbor full of fishing boats, and the irony of the venue was lost on every officer in the building and on none of the fishermen below it, whose city the inquiry's subject had lately declined to fall upon. They summoned me on the 19th day, while Stillwater still hung in clean orbit with 90 of my people in her wards. They summoned Deves Kill and her ledger. They summoned, to the visible discomfort of the protocol section, Master Rigger Thomas Calloway and Commander Ruth Osey, citizens of no registered polity in the hegemony's books, signatories representatives of an instrument the hegemony's book said had been dead for 2.5 centuries. The humans came. I had wondered if they would. Calloway wore a suit of plain black that fit him like an apology and told me, in the marble lobby, that he had buried better men than he was in this collar, and Osi wore her service uniform, which is gray and bears. I noticed for the first time a small open hand stitched above the cuff. The board's president was Fleet Warden Ostrek Val himself. I record that he is a tall man, correct in every furrowing of his crest, and that he conducted the proceedings with scrupulous fairness, which is the most damning thing I can put in the record, because it means that everything that followed was not malice. It was the system, operating as designed. They established the facts without difficulty, because we brought them. The switching fault. The shot barge with magazines never drawn down. There was a deferral order. It emerged, renewed annually for 19 years, signed by a procurement office that had calculated the drawdown cost each year, and each year found it exceeded the disposal budget. 26-day doctrine, applied as written. The transmission from my keel gallery on a band that appeared in no current registry. And the response, 3 foreign hulls, one of them armed, operating in sovereign volume for 16 days without authorization, removing hegemony citizens to foreign decks, handling hegemony dead, conducting an unsanctioned orbital intervention above the planet's most populous coast. Harbormaster Roa. Val's voice was even. When you activated the legacy device, were you aware that the receiving party would be a non-registered foreign power? I was aware of nothing, Fleet Warden, except that the flotilla had quoted me 26 days against 8 days of air. You did not consider it your duty to await relief as instructed? I considered it my duty to keep the souls that hang from my keel breathing. I am informed there is an older instrument on file that defines the duty the same way. The advocate for the Admiralty rose at that and addressed himself to the question of the instrument. The Keel Compact he established had been executed by the Keelwright Guild, a body dissolved by absorption 91 years post-signature. All Guild-era foreign instruments had been declared lapsed by general order of consolidation. The lapse was, in hegemony law, total and self-executing. He established it elegantly. Then he made his mistake. He asked Deves Kill, 82 years old, sworn in on her own ledger because she would swear on nothing else, whether the order of consolidation had ever been served upon the other signatory. Deves considered him for a moment with the patience of a woman who has outlived 4 filing systems. Advocate, she said. The order could not be served on the other signatory because the other signatory was filed under convoy, in transit, address unknown, and no officer in 256 years was assigned to learn the address. I know because the assignment would have crossed my desk, and my desk has very good records of everything that never crossed it. She laid her hand flat on the ledger. But I can tell the board what was served. Every year without one lapse, this hegemony served new power cells to the Compact's transmitter by my requisition, countersigned by 41 successive audit officers of the Admiralty itself. The hegemony has been paying the upkeep on that signature since before any member of this board was hatched. If the board wishes to argue the Compact is dead, the board must first explain why it never once stopped feeding it. There was a silence in the chamber of a very particular texture. It is the silence of an institution encountering its own handwriting. They called Calloway in the afternoon. The advocate asked him, with courtesy, by what authority 3 human vessels had entered hegemony space. By the handle, sir, Calloway said. The device is 347 years old. So's the promise. Neither of them was broken. Master Calloway, the Compact was lapsed under our law. Aye, so I'm told. He scratched his beard, unhurried. A workman asked to evaluate someone else's weld. Sir, I'll say to this board what I said to the harbormaster. We didn't sign with your law. Your law wasn't born. We signed with the yards of Keltara and their heirs, for as long as the handle was kept bright and the watch was kept manned. Your own audits kept the handle bright. Our watch stayed manned, the way we read it. The only parties to that compact who ever went absent, and he looked, without heat, without anything but plain workman's appraisal, down the long table of the board, were lawyers. And the compact never needed lawyers. It needed 31 hours, and it got them. The advocate asked his last question then, the one his whole case had been walking toward, whether the human vessels would comply with a board ruling that their intervention had been unlawful, and submit to penalties. Commander Osi answered that one. She had sat all day, straight-backed and silent, and she stood to answer it. The board should rule as its conscience and its law require, she said. The Compact's ships will comply with any lawful instruction that does not require us to abandon survivors, surrender the dead to anyone but their families, or break the watch. I am instructed by my service to inform the board of one further thing. She did not raise her voice. I doubt she has ever needed to. Whatever is ruled in this chamber, long patience remains on station, The band remains open, and the handle remains live. Penalize us as you see fit. If the handle rings tomorrow, we will come anyway. That is not defiance, Fleet Warden. That is just what the words on the plate say. We did not write them alone. The board recessed for 3 days. I spent them aboard Stillwater, sitting with my people, signing the forms that give the dead back their names, and standing at a ward window with Pel and Oru watching Kel turn underneath us, blue-white and oblivious, the Curvana shore kindling its evening lights exactly as it had on the morning the sky almost learned to fall. They'll rule against the compact, Pellin said. Won't they? They have to. If the compact stands, then the lapse order was a clerical fiction, and the doctrine was a death sentence read aloud politely. And the whole registry of struck-off species is just a list of handles nobody squeezed. Yet. Mind your footing, right, I said, but gently, because he was right, and because I had read the same conclusion in Fleet Warden Vall's correct, unhappy face all through the hearings. An institution can survive being wrong. What it cannot survive is the discovery that being right was always available cheaply in a keel locker, requiring nothing but the willingness to answer. The ruling, when it came, was a masterpiece of the form, and I include its substance for the record. The board found the foreign intervention technically unlawful, and assessed against its participants a fine of 1 mark, the smallest instrument in hegemony law, in recognition of extraordinary mitigating service. It found the Keel Compact lapsed as an instrument of state, but found further that as a chartered obligation of the yards of Keltara, predating the hegemony, it had never been within the state's power to lapse, and remanded the question of its standing to the anchorage's own chartered authority, which is to say, to its harbormaster. It found the 26-day doctrine worthy of review. It found the shot barge deferral orders worthy of prosecution and named names, and it directed that the legacy device aboard anchorage Keltara be, I quote the operative line entire, maintained in accordance with existing audit practice. 41 renewals without a lapse. The hegemony, having been caught for 2.5 centuries keeping a promise it insisted it had canceled, ruled that it would go on keeping it, and called that a finding. Calloway paid the 1 mark fine at the clerk's window in the marble lobby, in cash, and asked for a receipt. He framed the receipt. It hangs today in the mess of long patience where the watch can see it, beside the original photograph of Guildmother Avessa Torn and Convoy Master Elias Ngata shaking hands across a keel plate in a yard that no longer exists under a line of old Sarathi that the human watchkeepers, I am told, can all read now without the gloss. It says what the plate in my gallery says. Answer comes, there remain the dead and the leaving and the signing, and I will take them in that order, because that is the order in which they happened, and the order in which they weigh. We buried our dead by guild right, which gives them to Kel's son in a slow ellipse. Each capsule cut from the anchorage's own plate so that the keel goes with them. 432 capsules. Stillwater's machine shops cut plate alongside my rights for 9 days, and her crew learned the rights responses in old Sarathi from Deves, who drilled them without mercy. And when the capsules went out on the long light, the humans stood the rail with us, bareheaded, and Asha Pharaoh, ribs still strapped, carried Amma Dessel's capsule to the launch handcradle herself, walking carefully, refusing the lift dolly, while 17 fitters of Bay 5 stood an honor lane the length of the hold. There is a recording. I have watched it once a year since, and I find I am not able to watch it more often than that, and I find I am not able to stop it never. The leaving was quick, because work was waiting for them elsewhere. The galaxy does not pause its emergencies out of respect. Stillwater went first, with our worst burned aboard for the journey to her fleet's long care wards, accompanied by their families, all carried without charge and without being asked, because, compact job, the purser said, as if quoting a law of nature, and stamped the manifests. Adamant held the sky until the last hour. Plowman unclamped from my keel on the 33rd day, and the silence where her gantries had sung was a hard thing to stand in. Calloway came to the keel gallery before he went. He stood in front of the handle with his hands behind his back like a man at a grave or a promotion board, and what he said was this: "Your seam welds on the spur repair are better than mine, your registrar frightens me more than my first foreman did, and your boy Oru rigged that last spider line like he'd been doing it since the guild. The yards are in good hands, harbormaster. That's not courtesy. That's a rigger's assessment, and I'll be filing it." Then he shook my hand in the human way, palm dry and grip like a clamp, and went up the ladder, and at the top of it he stopped, and looked back down at the brass one last time. "Keep it bright," he said. "Keep the watch," I answered, and heard, from the man who had crossed a debris plane for a 3-century-old wrong number, the entire philosophy of his species in 4 flat words. Never stopped. Won't start. The signing came last, a year later, when the rebuilt comm mast was raised and the new Arc 1 held pressure and the anchorage's charter authority, which the board, in its exquisite cowardice, had ruled was me, convened in the Keel Gallery, the only treaty conference I expect to attend in my life. Earth sent no minister. Earth sent the watch. Imogen Hale, senior watchkeeper of long patience, a small woman of middle years with gray at her temples and the calm voice I would have known anywhere in the dark, who had answered my handle at 041 station time and moved 3 ships with 11 words. She brought the original compact from the station safe, guild paper, the 2 signatures faded brown, Avessa torn, Elias nada. We laid Deves's ledger beside it, and the new instrument beside that, and the new one says what the old one says, because we tried for a month to improve the wording and found that the guild mother and the convoy master had used exactly as many words as the truth required and not one more. A keel is sacred. Whoever signs keeps 1 watch and 1 handle. Answer comes. 2 changes only. The new compact bears 4 signatures, not 2. The yards of Keltara and the watch of long patience, and because Pelin Oru, who is 30 now and wears a Master Rights crest tattoo and argued for it in front of the hegemony's own observers, with his inner eyelids steady, as plate, the Fitters Guild reborn, and the city of Curvana, whose council had read the orbit plot that was never allowed to happen and voted to, put their name under any paper that kept the sky in its place. And the watch is kept on both ends now. We built our rock at the inner shoal, 60 light minutes from Earth's nearest lane, and we man it in rotation, 6 at a time, 2 years at a stretch. My own rights and clerks, and 1 permanently outraged registrar emerita, who at 84 declared herself too old for orbit and then audited the station into existence anyway. There is a handle on Earth's side now. It has never rung. Our watch keeps its cell renewed, every audit, without 1 lapse, and polishes the brass whether or not anyone is coming, because that is what keeping it bright means, and because we of all species are not entitled to assume a wrong number, will never need answering. The Fleet Warden's flag lieutenant asked me once, at the signing, in the polite voice the Admiralty now uses on this station, what operational benefit the hegemony derived from a harbormaster maintaining a mutual aid watch for a species 6 jumps away. I gave him the figures. 31 hours, 14 minutes, signal to first hull alongside, 158 names that breathe. A coastline of 2 million that never learned it was a probability smear. Then, because he was young and meant well and was writing everything down, I took him to the Keel Gallery and made him put his hand on the brass, on the grip worn luminous by 14 generations of hands that touched it, just to touch it, and I told him what I have come to understand is the whole of it, the entire law of which everything else, the compact, the watch, the tug, the corvette, the white ship, the receipt framed in a mess hall 41 light minutes from here, is just the procedure. Somebody, somewhere, is always sending a signal to the wrong address, to gods who moved, to fleets that lapsed, to empires that stopped reading their own mail. The signal does not care. The signal only asks who is still plugged in at the other end. My grandmother's guild answered a broken keel from 11 light decades away and thought no more of it than of any honest job, and 3.5 centuries later, in the hour my station was dying in a plain of our own neglect, their work came back up the old wire wearing an orange suit and an apology for being 3 hours slow. The hegemony's registry has a new line for humans now, longer than 4 lines. I wrote the addendum myself, as chartered authority of Anchorage Keltara, and the registrars let it stand, I suspect, because Deves trained every one of them, and they are all afraid of her. It does not call them monsters, and it does not call them saviors, because both words are ways of refusing to learn anything. It says party to the Keel Compact. Response history, 1 activation, 1 answer. They keep their watches manned and their dead company and their promise as bright, and they do not ask the cost of anything until everyone is breathing. File under signatories. Cross-reference. See handle. I am old now as Deves was then. I have stood my own rotations on the inner shoal, and on the night watches I sometimes sit with the band hissing quiet, and the cell meter green and the brass bright under the work light, and I think about a young human standing the same watch over a silent handle in the year 90 of the lapse, and the year 200, and the year 340, with every reason in the registry to believe no one would ever call, renewing the cell anyway, signing the log anyway, keeping the porch light on for strangers her great-grandparents owed. We did not aim our distress at Earth. I will say it one last time so the record is clean. We never called them. We squeezed a handle wired to a promise our own empire had canceled, on a band only the faithful still monitored, and the faithful turned out to be the whole species. The handle sits in its cage below my feet, bright as the day the guild bolted it down. The watch log on my desk is open to tonight's page, and the entry I will write before I sleep is the same entry the humans wrote. 41 light minutes out, every uneventful night for 347 years, and I understand it now. The way you only understand a thing once it has saved your life. Band open, cell green, handle bright, no calls, the watch is kept.